Hi, I'm Stella O'Malley, a psychotherapist in Ireland.
And I'm Sasha Ayad, an adolescent therapist in the United States.
Through in-depth interviews, personal stories, and psychological exploration, we probe the gender landscape within contemporary culture.
And we consider the implications of prioritizing personal identity over other aspects of the self.
This is the thinking person's take on gender.
Join us as we look at gender from a wider lens. Hi, Stella.
How are you, Sasha?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
I'm good. It's a hot day in Ireland and the country's having a nervous breakdown.
Oh,
Everybody's walked along going, the heat.
Well, in Arizona, we're very used to the heat, and it's actually starting to cool down. So I'm having the opposite experience. It's nice.
Yeah. And actually, ironically, your weather's probably a good deal hotter than ours. We think we're in the desert. We think we're in the desert when it's about 27 or 28. What is that? Something like
like in the 80s, I think.
Yeah. Something like that.
What else is going on? Of course, we have a special day today.
Yes!
We're recording on a special day.
It's a very special day. Today is the day that our lovely book got launched in the UK, which is extraordinary. Lisa Marciano, our lovely co-author, wrote a very, very moving tweet thread about our friendship and about us coming together and how she first met us. I teared up. Like, it was beautiful. It was beautiful.
It's amazing because it was a while ago. I mean, we met in 2017. And I mean, what we see now is like all the media and all the journalists are starting to talk about this issue of the quote trans kid. And we've been deep in the weeds with this since pretty early on. So reading Lisa's tweet thread about, you know, the first time I contacted her, I had heard her talking on a podcast. She was the first person I ever heard talking about the explosion of trans-identified kids. And then
wait a second. And did you pause or did you go, I have to contact this person?
In the middle of the interview, I stopped it and I was at work. I was working in a middle school at the time and I emailed her in the middle of the interview. I didn't even bother finishing it. And I just said, oh my gosh, I've been following this too. I can't believe what's happening. Do you want to talk? And within a day, we were on the phone talking. We started just talking regularly. And then she talked about meeting you. You were already well known with your film and you had been a mover and shaker in Ireland and in the UK. And like, we all knew who you were. So to connect together and then obviously
can I just say,
my
image of you two was like you were the clever ones. And I was really like, as you know, because Lisa said she was starstruck meeting me, and like that's laughable because I was so intimidated by the two of you. And when I'm really impressed with people, I tend to slightly avoid them. So she sent me a lovely email, and rather than being a normal person and going towards her, I'm like, I hold back. And I wouldn't mind, but I'm really friendly otherwise. But if I really, really like you, I'll probably back off a bit.
Oh, Stella, I can imagine you as a child very much now as you say that. But our book that we wrote together is called When Kids Say They're Trans. And this is a guide for thoughtful parents in the UK. And essentially this is a guidebook for parents who want their children to thrive, who love their child, they want to be supportive, but they actually don't think socially and medically transitioning their child is the best way to really help the child with their real problems. So this book offers all the information that a parent may need to know about what is the current research, what do we know and not know about these gender transitions, why are kids suddenly announcing a trans identity, what is ROGD. So it gives parents the info they need to know to make an informed decision, but also helps them with some of the delicate, complicated, practical things they need to do. They need to navigate conversations with extended relatives, with the kid's school, how to actually manage conflict with the child, how to care for themselves. So there's a lot of information, but also practical strategy to help parents, you know, feel more confident and capable of dealing with this, because a lot of parents are described that they feel totally lost, like they don't feel right about affirming, but they don't know exactly what to do.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier, just before we kind of started recording, that the parents out there who are right now, I just feel for them, that are right now trying to navigate gender, not understanding things, feeling like they're being rushed along, scratching their head thinking, this doesn't feel intuitively appropriate for my kid. And I'd love, in a way, to help them out, to get that book to those parents. I know there's parents who listen and who know us and understand us, and I hope we get their support, and certainly I hope they benefit from the book. But those particular parents, the ones who are lost in the wilderness and don't know that there are other options, I'd love if, you know, for example, if the book is in bookshops today in the UK, wouldn't it be lovely to think of somebody just picking it up? Just going, oh, what would this be? And probably by the time this podcast is released, it'll be also out in the US, because it's only about a 4-week difference between the two. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really hope it's helpful. It's remarkable to me, you know, sometimes we hear from parents who say, for the last 2 years, I've been struggling with this issue, and I didn't even know that there were therapists and psychologists and doctors offering a different perspective, because everybody that I interacted with at my kids' you know, psych hospital or my kid's therapist office or my kid's doctor, everybody was just using this kind of cookie cutter affirmation model that says you have to follow the child's declaration. You have to move on to the next step, which is get the haircut, get the binder, change the wardrobe. So some parents, surprisingly, don't even know that there's another perspective. And it's actually a perspective shared by a huge number of professionals, doctors. This is the most controversial area of psychology and of medicine. And yet, a lot of times you go to your therapist and you might get the impression that there's a complete consensus on what to do. And actually, that's not true at all. This is an incredibly hotly debated topic. And we see detransition stories coming out left and right. And we know that there's a real scandal going on here. So for parents who have been out there looking for an alternative perspective, we're so glad to hear that people are finding their way to things like our podcast, our book, our membership groups, your Gen Spec's incredible organization. So we're glad that parents are finding these. And there's lots of other therapists who may not work with us directly, who are also kind of sharing their concerns and presenting alternatives. So we're glad to see more and more resources popping up for parents. Yeah.
And the thing is, we're conventional. We're the conventional psychotherapists who offer a conventional psychotherapeutic process. It's the new kid in town is the affirmative approach. That is the new deviation, and it's never actually been done in psychology or psychotherapy before. I think people don't know that, but they do kind of say afterwards, it did feel very unpsychological, if you follow me. It doesn't feel like that. But I want to point out that if we have any new listeners who might not know much about us, we have a Patreon and we do take questions. If anybody wants to, you know, to add in their questions, because I know if I was a parent in this, I would have so many questions. I'd blitz the place with questions, and we welcome that. We really do, because we want to be informative. We've learned so much in these years, and it's an incredibly complex. People simplifying this and believing that trans is the new gay have missed multitudes about this complex condition.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, in our listener community, we take parent questions. We do these weekly kind of Q&As. And also we have a new kind of series that we're doing called Dinner Party Conversations, where we ask our guests that are available for full episodes, we ask them, hey, in your real life, how do you talk to people about gender? Because a question you and I get a lot is, you know, at my schools, I'm on my school's PTA board. And I want to talk about gender, but I'm not sure how to bring it up. I'm nervous. I don't know the best way. Or, you know, we were having lunch with our neighbors and they're transitioning their child and they expect that we're affirming our child. So how do we bring this up? So this is actually a huge question. And you and I also are trying to figure out the best way to talk about these issues in our real lives with our friends and families and neighbors and so on. So that's been really interesting to explore. So for sure, if you're a parent and you have a question you'd like us to answer, please join our listener community and submit it. We'll definitely get to it. And if you just want some more ideas of how to bring up these kinds of conversations in real life in ways that will go better than you might expect, you know, that's a great place to go. So
Yeah.
we invite you to join us there in the Patreon listener community.
Yeah. There's so much going on. There's so many resources. It's easy for people to feel a little bit overwhelmed. And hopefully our little book will be a nice kind of, almost something to have beside your bed that'll just kind of, you can flick onto any chapter and start reading it if you're worried or if you have concerns, hopefully. Because I do hear, do you ever get some messages and they say, I was listening to you in the middle of the night, or when I can't sleep, I listen to and we should have this kind of go back to sleep.
Maybe we should do that right now. If it is 3:00 in the morning and you are supposed to be sleeping, please turn us off. Grab a glass of chamomile or a cup of chamomile tea and unwind with a pleasant book, not with a book about gender. Okay, so today we wanted to talk about something that we feel is so important. It's actually shocking that we haven't done an episode on this much earlier.
I know.
But we think that a lot of people, well-meaning people, believe that affirming a child's gender identity is no different than affirming a child who says, I think I'm gay. And to be fair to people who believe this, it is absolutely a message that you might get from pretty much all media publications. If you look at the affirmative model of therapy, which we covered in a different episode, it's also based on the assumption that whatever a child's stated gender identity is, operates in a similar way as a child's stated sexual orientation. And this is even being used within a medical framework of medical confirmation or affirmation or gender affirmative surgery. So it's very interesting how this has been conflated. And so we wanted to spend some time today picking apart these two ideas of a kid being trans versus a kid being gay, and why we tend to think that actually there are serious reasons not to conflate affirming these two declarations from a young person.
And not to conflate the experience of being gay as a child and then growing up to become gay as such, that kind of awkward, you know, with the experience of gender dysphoria and seeking to medical. These are two incredibly different experiences. I think I have come to think that there's a huge amount of sex within a gender identity. I do think there is. So I can see why there is an overlapping. But that doesn't mean it's the same. They're very different concepts.
When you say I've come to see that there's a lot of sex overlapping,
yeah,
I think I know what you mean. But say more about that.
Yeah, I do believe that very often there's sexual repression in a gender identification. That some people, especially maybe teenage girls, seem to be repressed sexually. And they're cloaking that with gender identity, and they really are. That's my experience of working with young people. And then there's another type where it's an erotic impulse that is happening, that is effectively expressed within their gender identity. So again, two kind of sex reasons as such. And I say that with some discomfort, because then I think of myself as a kid, and like I was obviously 3 or 4, and
tell your story. I mean, in case anybody is new here, this is really important because Stella, you've experienced profound and intense gender dysphoria for years. So just tell a bit about your story.
It's so funny. Little did I know all those years ago whether that I'd be talking about it. But when I was a very young kid, from the age of 3, like as far back as my memory went, I wanted to be a boy, and it was very intense, and it wasn't good. It was dysphoria. You know, you could see the distress in it. It wasn't a pleasant thing. It was a determination to be a boy. It was a kind of a strong feeling that I needed to convince everybody that I am a boy. And that it was kind of almost this magical thinking of the child that if I am boy enough, I will be a boy. And I just had to be enough boy when you're a kid, you're magical thinking. You think if you don't step in the cracks, you're going to be, you won't have to go to school that day. You know what I mean? We have
that's in our book. Yeah,
it is actually.
Yes.
Yeah. So don't underestimate the magical thinking of a kid. And I thought I could almost convince everybody with the power of my intent that I would be a boy, just by being so boyish. And I was very boyish. I was very good at being boyish. And I often think that's kind of very interesting. What was it about me that made me so conventionally masculine? Why did I drive towards it? Why did I want it? Why was I so... And I look back and I was an inner misogynist. I hated girls. Thought they were really irritating. Really didn't like them. Girlish was a really derogatory insult for me. And so for many years, I experienced it. I was persistent, insistent. I was consistent. And I was powerful in it. And I was well aware that I was impressing adults in my life and anybody older in my life and how intense I was about it. And I didn't miss that. I knew it was impressive. I knew they were testing me with questions. And I saw that with I Am Jazz as well. You know what I mean? It's a kind of... They almost ask the question and then they're like, whoa, they really are into it. And I'm like, kids see through that. Like, they know what they're doing. And, it's kind of easy. But then I went through puberty, and puberty was awful. It was a terrible, terrible experience for me. Really, really unhappy. I was really, really uncomfortable. I hated my body. I was so animalistic about it. I wasn't even aware that this was puberty I was hating. It was just me, my body. Everything was going wrong for me. It was awful. And yet, I definitely, looking back, I hadn't realised that a sexual awakening begins effectively with non-sexual crushes. I've only really kind of figured that out recently, as far as come here. And so, I had these really intense crushes. And it's so interesting because, Helena, she's a detransitioner. She and I clearly were maniacs in the way we fancied people. No offence, Helena, if you're listening. But the two of us spoke about it. And it was clear we were mad. When we fancied people, it was this extraordinary intensity. And it's like, in a way, that extreme, intense obsession with other people eventually pulled me out of the gender dysphoria. I'm saying all this in hindsight. At the time, none of this was obvious. Yeah. But over the years, I certainly pulled out of having gender dysphoria. I left it behind. I was ashamed and humiliated, very, very, very embarrassed, because I realised nature was bigger than me. Puberty had made that clear. I needed to just get on with it and forget that entire decade, because now it's embarrassing. So I had to do that, and then I had to, on some level, just... It's not that I became happy to be a girl. I just was a girl, and I had to just get with the program. So a very different time. And then ultimately I came out of it. And then I became comfortable in my own skin, and it never came back. Lots of people seem to... It continues. It's kind of there. It completely left me. It never came back. No sign of it. Nothing.
Yeah. And something I just want to touch on here, because of course I know your story well, and it was covered beautifully in the BBC film, Trans Kids, It's Time to Talk. So if anyone wants to watch that, we'll put that in the notes. But something that I think is very important here, especially if you are kind of new to the debate around childhood gender transition, is that a lot of times people look at, let's say, a typical, quote, rapid onset gender dysphoria kid with a history of being very gender conforming. Oh, I hear all the time, she loved to play with Barbies and princess stuff, and she wore pink, and she refused to play with her brother, and she, all of a sudden, in adolescence, just kind of after a long brooding period being online too much, she decided she was a boy. And parents will often say to me, I'm an accepting liberal person. If she had always felt like a boy, I'd be fine with helping her transition. And whenever I hear people say that, of course, I think about you. And I think about the many listeners who have written to us saying, I would have been transed as a kid had I been a child today. They would have medicalized my gender distress, and I would not have had a chance to grow up and become the person I am now. And the truth is, we also have met tons of amazing transgender people who contact us and say, I also had a childhood history of dysphoria. And the important thing to know, and I think for me, this is the key reason why I don't treat a gender identity declaration the same as a sexuality declaration, is because none of us have the predictive power to know which is which.
Yeah.
And none of us know.
Yeah. And there is no test. There is no way to know. It emerges. It emerges. And we don't know what is what is going on in the person where they have this gender dysphoria, and why do some of us desist and completely desist, and why do some of us not? We haven't figured that out, but we haven't figured that out with a lot of issues.
Yeah.
We just don't know. I think that the stats, one thing we do know is the stats would show us, and the stats are limited. They're small, but what we do, it seems to be that a lot of boys who would be gender non-conforming as kids, like me, you know what I mean, but the boy version of me, very often grow up to be gay. And the girls sometimes do. You know, there is they're more likely to be gay, but they don't, it's not quite as likely. If they're a boy and they're gender non-conforming, the likelihood of them being gay is really quite high.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people don't really know that. I think a lot of people believe that a child will know who they are. And they think, well, if a child might be gay, you know, they might be feminine as a kid, but they're not going to say, oh, I'm literally a girl. But actually they do. And gender dysphoria, the distressing condition of being convinced you're in the wrong body, is actually a common part of some adult gay people's consolidation of their gender identity. So this is another way that it's so important to understand these things, because when we look at, for example, what happened in the UK with the largest gender service in England being, investigated and essentially being shut down and replaced with more local centers for support, a lot of clinicians there who were whistleblowers and resigned said, I think we're transing all the gay kids. They made a joke, a dark joke of there are going to be no more gay people in the UK because we're transing all of them. That's a remarkable thing to say. So when people believe that affirming somebody's stated gender identity is the same thing as accepting them as a gay person, they couldn't be further from the truth, because sometimes it's precisely a struggle with one's sexuality, which is creating gender dysphoria.
Yeah. And that's a complicated point, and it's a very, very, very relevant point, that so many gay people have said to me, people I've worked with and people I haven't worked with, when I say worked with, I mean counselled, have said to me, my internal homophobe was my biggest challenge. Actually, my mother and father were all right. I didn't want to be gay. And I jumped through hoops trying to convince myself not to be gay, because I just didn't want to. And I couldn't even tell you why, because I was very pro people being gay, but I didn't want to be gay myself. And I think that is underestimated. I think we thought that all we needed was our pride flags and our marches, and that people would be cool about being gay. Something really quite resistant some people are to being gay.
Yeah. Well, there's so many things that you bring up that I think are important. One type of story, if we were to kind of try to identify like archetypes, one story that I've noticed in a lot of trans people and detransitioners and kind of people who struggle with dysphoria is that they came from backgrounds which explicitly kind of demonized homosexuality. So to them, it was very clear that becoming gay would be the worst thing possible for me. And then through that kind of shame that was really internalized from the external world, the gender dysphoria developed, and like, I'm not supposed to be having these feelings. I'll never be okay as a gay woman or a gay man. So like, there's that story. But then there's another story, which you're describing, which is a person who actually has consciously liberal views. Yeah. People whose parents have, even from a young age, said, honey, one day you'll grow up and get married to a man or a woman. We don't care who it is. Like, we'll love you no matter what. And even those kids, have some complicated feelings about it. And I believe that this is the nature of a sexual awakening. It's hard. It's complicated. It's filled with shame. You're turned on by somebody. You're afraid of rejection and all of these things. And when a young person is consolidating their orientation, if a girl, for example, has a crush on a female friend and gets rejected by her, whether in a nice way or a cruel way, that can be an incredibly shame-inducing experience. And I can imagine for boys too, there are still boys who make homophobic jokes or who kind of macho alpha male types. And if he feels insecure about his attractions and his orientation, of course he might shy away from his own realization, even if he intellectually believes, I support gay rights. It's one thing to have an intellectual view on something, and it's a different thing to embody it with grace and compassion,
Yeah. And I think our road to becoming a sexual being is difficult, whether we're gay or straight. I don't think too many people have it easy. I don't think, it seems to be quite difficult, and a lot of shame, a lot of body loathing, a lot of the kind of unrequited love. I've thought quite a lot about this unrequited love that we get into, and I got into very much in adolescence. And I think we move, it's quite interesting, and that's one of the reasons I think puberty blockers are really not helpful in this, even whether they're going to transition in the future or not, because I think having a sexual awakening means you move from being childlike, which is self-obsessed, to being other obsessed, because you are having a sexual awakening and you think about other people you're targeting, and also your social skills, well, certainly mine, improved because I realized I had to make myself more attractive to the world, because I fancied other people, and I realized it doesn't really cut it walking around like a maniac, furious with everybody. I had to become nicer. And I remember that was a bit of that was a big event for me, this realization of effectively becoming attractive to the other sex, or becoming attractive to other people. That doesn't happen if somebody doesn't have a sexual awakening. They arguably stay in the introspective, self-absorbed, childlike state. So a sexual awakening is bringing in an awful lot of things. But what it is also bringing in is all these crushes and unrequited love and an awful lot of pain, and that existential, that big ache that an adolescent has for a mate, for another person. It's the beginning of the loneliness of being human, because up until then you're kind of part of your family, your mummy and daddy. That's you, and you're on your own, and you don't care that you're on your own because you haven't had a sexual awakening. Then you have a sexual awakening, and arguably you then are looking for your mate, and for maybe 10 or 15 years there's a kind of loneliness to being a person. Yeah. And then you meet somebody, if you follow me, and you're like, oh, we're together, you know what I mean? And so those years, there is a loneliness to being the adolescent and the person in their 20s. Again, arguably that won't happen if somebody has puberty blockers, but it all gets so muddied if that person that I'm talking about, if their loneliness is towards same-sex attraction, but they think they're trans. They think they're trans, and they think that they're putting complexity upon a complexity with that.
Yeah, and I mean, if a young person is trying to sort through their sexual feelings and their orientation, it's so important for them to stay grounded in reality. And I think, Kathleen Stock wrote really beautifully about this in her book, Material Girls, about like what are the different conceptions of what is a gender identity. Oh, yeah. And at one point she talked about how, sometimes a gender identity is something that society is willing to entertain to be polite, a kind of like suspend your disbelief fiction. Like if, somebody is female and she identifies as a trans guy, we might call her he, him, and pretend she's a guy. But if somebody is trying to figure out their sexuality and we affirm the gender identity, it makes it actually very hard to sort through what's real and what's not, and what do my feelings mean about me and who I like and who I'm attracted to. And then conversely, and almost more importantly, who may be attracted to me. You know, if you're a young lesbian, essentially you want to be with other lesbians, young women who like women. So if you start transitioning in order to pursue relationships with straight women, you're in a way kind of denying reality for yourself to some degree and for the other person. Now, I want to be fair. I do think that in some cases this works absolutely fine. And I know trans men who are married to women and have very happy relationships, and there's no issue around that. But when someone is young and still full of shame and ambivalence about who they are, there's a real risk to going along with a gender identity that might be covering up their sexuality, or might be coming from a place of internalized homophobia, or for some of the kind of more ROGD profile of kids, coming from a variety of other mental health conditions, body image issues, eating disorders, you know, really serious depression, or, you know, all kinds of other things. So when we think about the implications of just agreeing with a child, you know, if a 15-year-old girl says, I think I'm a lesbian, and you say, okay, great, honey, no problem. That's a little bit different than when she says, I think I'm a boy. And then the whole family basically has to engage in this suspension of disbelief, this fiction, to say, oh, okay, well, we'll call you he. We'll stop saying that you're female. We'll change your name. We'll change your identity documents. We'll change your presentation to the world. And we're going to go along with this idea. There are much more serious implications for that kind of affirming a child compared to affirming a child who's in the process of sexuality exploration.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I think when you look at it, when, let's say when a child comes out as gay, or when a child comes out as trans, their age matters. So if they're 5 and they say they're gay, you just smile along and say, that's nice. And you do absolutely nothing, because you're kind of thinking, why are they saying it? What is that all about? And you just think that's adult and strange. And you know, it might be a red flag. It might be some sort of sexualized background, something. But
or they heard something on TV. I mean, 5-year-olds are usually not making declarations. Yeah. They might say, Mommy, one day I want to get married like you, or I want to be a mommy like you. I mean, those things. But anyway, keep going.
But whatever they do, the adult does very little, really. They might just think, I need to check the background there. I might need to check the context. I might need to change things. But ultimately, they don't say, you're gay. Let's talk about it. Let's, sail you into a new life where you could meet gay people. Do you know what I mean? They don't do anything like that. So if a child at 5 says that they are the opposite sex, in some places, in some schools, in some societies, in some families, it is quite quickly these days, in this extraordinary climate we're in, where there's such emphasis on gender identity, they could say, well, maybe you're trans. There's such a thing as a gender identity. Maybe you might want to change your name. Maybe you want to go to different toilets or changing rooms. Maybe you want, to use a new pronoun. Mm-hmm. This has never happened before. And kids love power and will be often very, very attracted to the idea of change and wow, and everybody dancing to my tune and stuff like that. So already the difference between a child saying it and saying they're trans, or whether saying they're gay, that same kid comes out at 15 and says they're trans or they're gay. Again, I'm not sure. I think there's a huge difference. So if a child said to me today, I was chatting with my kids' friends, and they were telling me all sorts of things. And if one of them said they were gay, I'd go, that's nice, but I wouldn't talk about it.
How old?
They're 15.
Okay.
Yeah, I wouldn't. I just wouldn't. I wouldn't get. Oh, let's talk about sex. Leave them to it. You know what I mean? Like, let them off. That way. And I wouldn't. I would have that fairly open, neutral expression that any therapist will have, which is not shaming. It's not trying to get all the crazy details. Mm-hmm. It's being open enough to let them say more if they want to, not closing it down, not opening it up, just holding it. This is down at the kitchen table before I came here. But if they said they were trans, like you said, there's an active participation is required these days, which is names, the usual pronouns and things like that. And so the massive difference in response between a declaration of being gay and a declaration of being trans hasn't been really penetrated. So many schools haven't realized this are completely different scenarios, and you really, to think that this is the same as being gay is laughable, because the participation needed from a school if a child declares they're trans versus the non-event if a child declares they're gay suggests how experientially different they are. But not only that, the other differences, now I'm on a rant, the other differences between, you know, a child, anybody being gay, a 74-year-old or a 14-year-old being gay, is that it's empirical. You can actually test if somebody's gay if you wanted, insofar as there can be tests if you wanted, and they could put kind of monitors on your genitals and on your glands and stuff like that and show you pictures, and you will react, you will physically respond, especially men obviously, to sexually explicit pictures of the target of your affections. And there is no empirical test, there is no tests with gender identity. It is your subjective reality, and it's utterly and only your subjective reality, and there's no way of testing that experience that I had as a kid with anybody else's experience that they had as a kid. All we can do is talk about it and describe it, but there is no actual definitive test. And I find when I'm talking to so many people who are lovely, well-meaning, thoughtful, intelligent people, they just presume that being trans is as biological as being gay. They feel that there's no difference. It's a different experience, but it's as fundamentally physical as being gay. And I'm like, but it isn't. One is psychological and the other is physical. Being gay is a physical response to other people. Being trans as such is a psychological response to how you are perceived in the world. We hope you're enjoying this episode of our podcast. We work very hard to maintain high quality content for the show.
To take an even deeper dive and support the show, join our listener community for access to exclusive content, practical tools, and resources supporting gender and identity exploration. We're so grateful to our sponsor, GenSpect, an international organization which offers an alternative to WPATH, providing a range of education, resources, and supports to anyone impacted by gender distress. GenSpect unites many different organizations globally and gives voice to thousands of previously untold stories. For more info, visit genspect.org. And thank you to our sponsor, GETA. GETA is an association of therapists who believe that individuals experiencing gender-related concerns ought to be treated using a whole person approach.
We connect like-minded clinicians, provide educational resources and training, and help people with gender dysphoria find the right help.
Visit GETA at genderexploratory.com. And now back to the conversation.
You know, I think our listeners wouldn't say this, but I do think a lot about this argument that I've heard from people who do affirm gender identities. They say, well, these same exact arguments were used about homosexuality not so long ago. So people used to say, and I've met people who still think this, that being gay might be a trauma reaction, just in the same way that detransitioners are saying now, you know, my identity was a trauma reaction. Or being gay comes from the fact that, like, you haven't met the right guy yet or whatever. And so some people say, you know, your gender identity will change when you just grow up and get a little more mature. So there is a way on the surface that these look like parallel arguments. And to be fair, I mean, when a kid says that they're gay, nobody is saying, well, let's hook up a feedback machine to your genitals and see if it's true. Like, hopefully.
And I am not advocating for that.
No, we're not advocating. But you're right. I mean, it's measurable. But let's just say none of this was measurable. Let's say that being gay was equally subjective.
Okay.
I still land on this point that the consequences of affirming it are basically telling the person that reality isn't real, that actually they need medical interventions in a lot of cases, and that's pretty serious.
Mm-hmm.
Even if, and I've talked about this in one of my YouTube videos, let's say a person's experimenting or exploring their sexual orientation, and they start out thinking that they're bisexual. And later on they think, actually, I think I'm just straight. And then later on they discover that they're gay or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
And they have a relationship with a woman, and then they sleep with a man, and then they have another relationship with a man. No harm done, really. I mean, unless you have some sort of moral issue with that. But on a purely, like biological health, psychological, no harm done whatsoever. It's okay to figure those things out over time. But once we start medically intervening with a person's stated identity, you have just done something concrete and irreversible. Even if the person changes the way they see themselves later, there are definitely some aspects of medical interventions that cannot be undone. So the stakes are just much higher with the consequences of, quote, affirming something.
And it's extraordinary when you start thinking about it, because you think, well, if it was true that there was all these trans kids in other generations and that they should have transitioned and that they didn't because they died by suicide or something, well, then the rates of suicide would have shot down, if you follow me, in this new era. There would have been an extraordinary drop, because this new cohort of kids that we had never figured out before, we had never identified, we had never affirmed them, they would be seen in the mental health context as happier. And they haven't been seen. In fact, they're very, very distressed. They're often very, very distressed. So it's a kind of an interesting kind of unsolved question about, this is a new generation. An awful lot of people see it as technology has finally caught up enough for these trans kids, and technology can finally give them what they need. Well, if that was the case, we would see it in other measures of mental health. And suicide would be the obvious one, but also other measures. We would see a whole cohort of children that are much, much happier because they accessed medication.
And this is a really important point, and I want to kind of use your story as an example. And as a caveat, we know that it's impossible to, in hindsight, go back and say, what would it have been like if this or that? But I just want to paint this picture for listeners. You know, people will see in the film, you looked like a boy. I mean, nobody who saw you would have thought you were a little girl. Mm-hmm. You were boyish. You fit in very comfortably in that role. But obviously people knew you were really a girl. Yeah. And as you've described before, at some point you realized they were just kind of pulling your leg. They were going along with it to almost see what you do. But
a horrible feeling that was. It was a horrible feeling of realizing I'm being pandered to. I take myself very seriously, and they're all pandering to me. Horrible. Yeah. Anyway, keep going.
But if you had been told, Stella, what you are going through is happening because you're transgender, and it's okay to be this way. And what we'll do is we'll make sure that when puberty comes, you don't have to deal with your breasts growth. We don't have to deal with periods. We're going to help you become a real boy just like you want. Jeez. I mean, I'm going to cry just thinking about it. You would have taken that. You would have taken that.
I would have taken it, and I would have thought it was the best thing ever. I would have thought I needed it. And I want to cry thinking of it, because the vulnerability of that kid, because I would have been wide-eyed thinking, I knew I was different. I knew this was something deep inside me, because that's what it felt. But anybody who's had any sort of, I would argue, mental health issues would say they almost become it. It feels like it's part of you. In Hadley Freeman's book about anorexia, she was talking about how deeply you identify, like, I am anorexia. If you follow me, that's how deep it goes. So for me as that kid, I would have it would have been the great solution to my pain. And I now fear in hindsight, we can't know, who knows, but I now fear in hindsight, it would have been a major wrong turning. Certainly for me, I ended up having children. It's the most important part of my life is having children. And I feel it would have put me on a medicalised pathway without an ability to get off the medicalised pathway. Because once you're on it, it's very, very, very hard to get off it, because even if you take puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones, you have medicalized your body, so the ability to go back to pre-medicalizing isn't there. You don't know how you've shaped the situation.
And I don't want to, like, it's so hard with all the unknowns, right?
Yeah.
It's possible, and I don't want to speak for you, but whenever we think about childhood transition and this story, this cohesive narrative that is being woven through the parents, the schools, the therapists, the doctors, everybody's telling this story, which is you're a transgender person. You will have medicine. It will help you. You can become the boy you want to be. And if that is the story you have forever, and you also have the story, if we hadn't done this, the suicide narrative is used all the time to push parents towards medically transitioning their kids. If we hadn't done this, you might have been very sick. You would have been mentally ill. There are probably people who were transitioned as children that may never get out of that story loop and may genuinely feel as though this was good for me. And I don't want to undermine that experience, because we all make sense of the world in the best way we can. And there's no reason to say that that's better or worse or right or wrong. But the truth is, when you intervene in a way that will medically shorten a lifespan, will impact your sexual functioning, your ability to connect intimately and sexually with your partner, with yourself, with your body. When you take away someone's opportunity to parent their child, then it's not just simply a neutral, different choice that you can make for your kid. It's really serious. And that's never a question when a kid comes out as gay. That is not in the cards for a kid who's saying, I'm gay.
And I've noticed that a lot of parents dismiss this point of view that we're putting forward today because they think, oh, no, we're fine with them being gay and they're fine about being gay. So this couldn't be a gay thing. They're identifying as trans because they must be inner trans. And they dismiss the concept of, well, a lot of people have internalized homophobia, and a lot of people have a slow sexual awakening. And I think that is underestimated. Lots of people, they don't know who they fancy at 14 and 15. I think that kid has been really hypersexualized. And when kids hear about sex before they're sexual, it is creepy, icky, it is horrible. And don't forget, if you're an unblossomed kid, if you haven't had a sexual awakening and everybody around you is talking sex, you're in a horrible environment. It's a horrible position to be in. And if you also will one day be same-sex attracted, I can just so see how they'd fall into feeling like they were trans because they haven't had a sexual awakening, and everybody's talking about sex all the time. And you're thinking, I don't fancy anybody, and I want to just be with my mates. Well, evidently I'm just trans, and they're my girlfriends. If you follow me, then I'm going to be a boy, and they're going to be my girlfriends. It's utterly platonic, is how they're thinking it. So there is the kind of non-sexual person who is identifying as trans because they are just they haven't had a sexual awakening yet, and often I find that they're very hard to kind of to handle as a parent or as a therapist, because nobody wants to make those kids talk about sex. They don't want to talk about sex. Why would we talk about sex? But it is an issue in a hypersexualized society, and some of them, like school, is so hypersexualized sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, if we were, at the risk of being accused of deeply psychoanalyzing trans, which that's the whole point of our podcast. So like, that's what we do.
Guilty.
But to be fair, like when I've met people from the affirmative model, they say, why are you denying people's identity? This is who people say they are. Why are you analyzing it? Like, that's not your job to tell people who they are. And you know what? I get that. I completely get that. But it's, if we were to be curious about it, which is the whole point, And you talk about these kids who are actually pre-sexual, like they're late bloomers. You know,
Yeah,
I was a
that's
late
great.
bloomer for sure. And I was so intimidated by my female friends and other kids I knew at school talking about sexual things with glee and excitement. And I was just terrified. Like that's all I was when I was really young. I'm remembering like 6th grade and 7th grade. And, you know, these kids are escaping a very interesting aspect of development by identifying as trans. They get to sidestep the entire sexuality question in a lot of ways because they are at war with their bodies. And you can't have a sexual feeling or a sexual experience when you're completely at war with your body. At least not always. I mean, I can imagine some scenarios where that could be true, but you know, it's like eating disorders are a desexualization of the body.
God, yeah.
You know, so if you think about it from that curious perspective and you ask, you know, if we don't take trans as the new gay, right? What is happening here? What is this young person trying to avoid? What are they trying to speed up? What is the meaning of this? What could they be trying to accomplish through this identity? And there are so many complicated issues that it's really important not to treat it as though it's just this superficial thing, like as though we take it for granted and take it at face value.
Yeah, don't take it for granted, because I think there's a very well known pathway to identifying as trans, and that is initially coming out as gay. And often that coming out as gay starts off very cool. I'm gay, I'm same-sex attracted, it's fine. And then there can be a real vulnerability, because coming out as gay is something that heterosexual people don't have to do, which is declare your sexuality. It's very vulnerable. I would have hated it. Oh my God, I would have just shriveled up and died at the idea of it. And that is a rite of passage that gay people have to do, that people who are heterosexual don't have to. They don't have to declare, I like. Imagine if everybody had to, at 14 or 15, declare how they got turned on. You know, how do you get turned on, Sasha? What turns you on? What actually turns you on? Just tell me exactly. Just give me a few very definite details.
It's so intimate. It's so private.
Yeah. And actually, gay and bisexual people actually have to do that in a way that we don't. We just go, I fancy him. We don't have to say anything about it. So the vulnerability of having to declare, throw it on the table so that everybody can think about it. We don't have to do that as so we get away without ever having to declare what turns us on. And it seems that 6 months later, a few months later, having come out as gay, I often think it was too vulnerable, it was too intimate, it felt too exposing, and now I'm coming out as trans. And it looks like I was cool about being gay. It looks like, this is the 14-year-old. Ostensibly it was fine. And then when you work with them, me and you have worked with these kids, often you talk to them a little bit deeper and it wasn't so fine. It was actually very vulnerable making, and people made a couple of remarks, and actually fundamentally there was kind of a mortification about how exposed they were. And being trans felt much more protected as a identity. I think people underestimate all of that is going on with it. There's a demeanour of it's cool, I was gay but now I'm trans, yeah, it's cool. And I'm like, yeah, there was that.
You know, I talked about this a little bit with Katie Herzog, which I don't know when it's airing, but when I was kind of figuring out myself, I really predominantly started out only being attracted to girls, and then that evolved over time. So for me, there was a period where I was telling people that I knew that I only date women, I'm only interested in women. And what happened for me at the time was some people were fine with it, but a lot of people didn't take me seriously at all. Oh. Maybe because I'm very feminine. Maybe because there were men that were like trying to, interested in dating me. Like I wasn't taken seriously by a lot of people. And when I think about the experience of a lot of FTM trans-identified girls, what's interesting about the trans identity is that you can do something to prove it. If you're a woman who's saying she's gay, other than like having a girlfriend, which people still won't take you seriously, how are you going to prove to anyone that this is real or that this is forever, right? And in my case, it wasn't. I mean, I'm in a relationship with a man. I mean, I'm still pretty fluid in my attractions and orientations, but it's interesting because trans gives you a pathway to be taken seriously. So if you say, I'm not really a woman, and people are like, yeah, whatever, you look like a girl. And you're like, well, watch this. I'm going to take testosterone.
Wow.
I'm going to make my body completely different. I am going to chop off my breasts. So it's a way to kind of concretize and validate your statements at a period of time when, as you said, kids need to be taken seriously. Our identities, our explorations, our distress, we need to take it seriously. And if you can't get the world on board with you, prove it. Okay, I'll cut my breasts off.
That is really interesting. Because, you know, we talk a lot about gender identity as a way to individuate. It's a way to separate from your parents. But I don't think you and I have given as much time to gender as a way to demand to be taken seriously. And just feeling that I haven't been really taken seriously enough by my parents, by teachers. Yes, they're taking my life seriously, but my thoughts, my beliefs, they're still being effectively patted and babied. And now you'll sit up. Now you're going to sit up and listen. Because now I'm looking for puberty blockers. I'm looking for testosterone. Now suddenly you're taking me deadly serious. And I would feel, that really sings to me and my childhood experience. That really, really hits me. Because it was like, I'm here and I'm deadly serious and you're all going to appreciate it because look, you know what I mean? Yeah. Watch this.
I have chills thinking about it. Watch this.
Yeah.
You didn't believe me? Oh, you're going to believe me now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, okay. So this really begs a very important question, which we talk about a lot, especially with our work around parents, which, you know, through the Q&As and through, like, you have a Substack and I have a membership group. But I think this is a really important question that we need to end this episode on. Okay. If we are saying we shouldn't literally affirm a trans identity because of all the reasons we've laid out, what is the right way to take a kid seriously when they announce trans? How do we do that? I mean, I have some ideas, but we need to at least give listeners something concrete here.
I was on the Spiked podcast and he asked me kind of something similar and I was like, because it's kind of like, well, it's the whole book. It's the book. Read the book. And then I had to say, right, no, I have to kind of gather my thoughts a little bit better than that. But effectively, I think when we say you go quiet and you start listening very intently, it is a kind of a moment of reckoning of, okay, now the world is tilted and now I'm listening. Now it's serious. Now I'm bringing everything. And that kind of fake patty, oh, you'll be happy soon. You know, that kind of parenty sing-song thing. That's gone out the window. You know what I mean? So if somebody is, and you know, it happened to me with my kid the other day. She came in and she was upset and I just immediately went into silly land of, oh, you'll be all right. And she kind of looked at me like she's going to kill me. And I was like, okay, whatever. Actually, I've got to take this seriously. I suppose you have to have, I'm kind of riffing here, but you kind of have to have the bravery to get down into the trenches with your child, that they're in serious distress. And we resist it because we don't want to know that the kid is in such distress. We want it to be silly, little kids, little problems.
Yeah.
And actually, it's take this seriously. I'm in pain and I need people to hear it. And so how do we do that, I think, is that we get into the trench with them.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I think parents have to really listen carefully, not so they can debate, but to really hear between the lines, to read between the lines.
Yeah.
If your daughter's saying, I just know I'm not a girl, there's a communication in that. When you have seen around your school or in your friend group, the girls who are girls, what's different about them than you? Let's hear it. Because there's something, there's either a specific circumstance or a series of events that have terrified her about being a girl. And if your son says, I hate my body hair, you know, you could go back and forth. Well, just last week you didn't care about your body hair, but actually he's saying something much more profound in a lot of cases. We know there's also a lot of binge watching and repeating things and scripted answers. But even Helena talked about this. I mean, she identifies as having been an ROGD kid. She recognizes her story. But at the core, there were serious, distressing, painful experiences that she was trying to make sense of. So it's important to go beneath the surface as much as you can and really listen with a compassionate ear.
And I would definitely say, certainly affirm the level, the depth of the distress. Certainly affirm the seriousness of the situation, of the communication. It's not non-affirming. It's more affirming and continuing and going deeper. It's not just it's very, very narrow-minded or almost superficial and shallow to just affirm and think that's the end of it. It's, I could see this is what you're feeling. Tell me more. Tell me more, because this is huge. And ideally, if the kid is talking, the more that you can kind of slow it down, slow the rhythm down, so it's a reflective conversation, as opposed to that fast, choppy, political, you might as well be on a YouTube channel. You know, moving it away from that into a slower, reflective, that can be really, really helpful.
Yeah. And for more in-depth suggestions, pick up our book. But seriously, I mean, we put a lot of energy into like some
I'm so glad
sample dialogues and scripts, and frankly, there's always more we could say. I mean, there's so many things we wish we had put in, but we do hope that it is a useful and deep and profound kind of guide for parents to trust their instincts.
And it's just occurred to me that now I can change my email. I've kind of got a pro forma email, I'm sure you do, of, oh, sorry, you know, I haven't got places available, but I have blah, blah, blah. Now we can say, well, there's a book. There's a book you can read, and this will help you. No, it's its own kind of mascot for parents to have. To think, I have a book that will, you know, just understand it's primarily a pro-parent book, and it's just to kind of explicitly help the parent to help kind of relationships with their kids. So hopefully,
that's right.
That'll make a difference.
Well, we hope this was a good overview. This is a very important and interesting topic, and we will we'll sign off here, I guess.
I reckon so.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us this week on Gender, a Wider Lens. Listener support means a lot to us. If you enjoy the show, please like and subscribe on iTunes and leave a review.
For more information, visit widerlenspod.com. There you'll learn about joining our listener community, how to contribute to our show, and where to find us on social media.
Our discussions are for educational purposes and are not intended as a substitute for mental health services.